Thanks very much, Marge. This format sort of tends us towards the cerebral instead of to the pounding and thunderous, but I'll try to be a little bit entertaining anyway. Citizens United is one of the all-time worst Supreme Court decisions in the history of the United States, and I think it is a certainty that it's going to be overturned. And the question we face is it going to be overturned in 2 to 5 years as we take concerted action to make it happen? Are we going to wait 50 or 100 years for a more sensible court to get around to it? And I think the thesis of this conversation is we want to be change makers, we want to take action, we want to make this thing happen and not wait for it to happen for us some undefined number of generations down the road. The holding of the case stands for the proposition that corporations have a First Amendment constitutional right to spend as much as they like from their own treasuries to affect election outcomes. Now, the decision was only about independent expenditures. It's not about direct contributions to candidates, but the basic holding is they can spend whatever they want. And as Marge said, I think by many measures, this is sort of a staggering decision. Right now, we can see how bad it is, and generations in the future are going to look back and be stunned by it. By a court majority that claims to revere precedent and be self-restrained and look to original intent. They were super aggressive, they overturned precedent, and they completely ignored any sense of what the framers might have wanted in making this decision. But even more important is going to be the logic of the decision and the consequences that are going to flow from it. And I think that's why it's going to be known as such a horrible decision for posterity and why we have to work so hard to get it overturned by a constitutional amendment. The decision, in its essence, rests on 3 conceptual pillars. The first idea is that money is speech, that spending money in political contest is a form of political speech, First Amendment protected, and that's settled law. The second provision, going before the decision, the second key pillar of the decision is that corporations are the same as people when it comes to the political speech component of the First Amendment. And that is a radical departure from 100 years of settled statutory and constitutional law. Now, the majority is very passionate about needing to protect the rights of corporations and their ability to speak so that they are not unfairly intimidated and bludgeoned in the political process. I'm not mocking them, I'm just reporting. I'll get to the mocking later. This is Justice Kennedy. Justice Kennedy is known for his love of the First Amendment. This is very powerful stuff. By taking the right to speak from some and giving it to others, the government deprives the disadvantaged person or class of the right to use speech to strive to establish worth, standing, and respect for the speaker's voice. I don't know if you can follow that as I'm reading it to you. It's pretty moving. It actually really speaks to the purpose of the First Amendment if we were talking about, oppressed African-American communities or some Muslim organization that's under threat after 9/11 or something like that. But that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the rights of Exxon and Goldman Sachs and Pfizer, and it is unbelievable. So a more common sense retort comes from Justice Stevens in his really powerful dissent. And he says, well, the fact that corporations are different from human beings might seem to need no elaboration. Except that the majority didn't get it. So he points out it might also be added that corporations have no consciences, no beliefs, no feelings, no thoughts, and no desires. Those are pretty consequential differences when you want to think about the purpose of the First Amendment and protecting people's expressive rights, their rights as citizens, and so on. There were other things that Justice Stevens might have listed if he had chosen to, if he wanted to highlight some of the distinctions between human beings, real life, breathing human beings, and corporations. He might have noted that corporations have perpetual life, whereas most of us do not. That corporations can be in 2 places at the same time, where most of us still don't have that capacity. Corporations can't be jailed. Corporations don't have a conscience or a sense of shame. They don't care about relationships. What makes us human is our ability to relate to others. Corporations exist on an island unto themselves. There are no natural limits to the size of corporations, and although we can eat a lot, there are some limits to what we can do. Through their influence, they have the ability to shape the laws and rules that determine what's permissible for them to do. There is no human being who can do that, not even Bill Gates can spend enough money to shape the laws that determine what Bill Gates, gets to do in any fundamental way. corporations can combine. So they can merge in ways that people usually haven't figured out the way to do it yet. They can also split. And while we can have kids, we can't split ourselves into multiple pieces. In fact, corporations, where we can have kids, corporations can have unlimited number of progeny through hundreds of subsidiaries, as a company like Citigroup does, which, although we have kids for many reasons, it's not usually for tax avoidance purposes. They are free to cross borders without limits, and they can have citizenship in multiple countries, something that most of us are not able to do, at least not more than 2 at the same time. Corporations have no concern for posterity, and they don't eat, they don't breathe, they don't drink the water, and they don't sweat, which is pretty significant. So they don't care about the quality of the food, quality of the water, the quality of the air, or climate change. It can be 110 degrees in Washington, D.C., and it's the same to them as if it were 70 degrees. That's not true for those of us who live there as real-life human beings. The third prong of the court's decision that's so startling and fundamental to their decision-making is that corporate spending in elections does not have a corrupting influence over politics, nor does it distort the political process. So the corrupting influence is the idea of quid pro quo corruption. And they say, well, look, these are independent expenditures. They're not contributions to Don Edwards or Alan Grayson. So no one could cut a deal with Don Edwards. So therefore, we can't corrupt her that way. Moreover, even more fundamentally, it can't distort politics. Corporate spending doesn't distort our democracy and the political process. Now, I think if we assume that the majority believe what they wrote, they believe that they said that, I think there are probably a total of 5 people in Washington, D.C. who believe that's how things work in Washington. What are the consequences going to be besides the metaphorical floodgate opening and the tsunami that's going to come? I think we are going to see a lot more corporate money in politics, and it's going to evolve over time. It's not all going to happen at once. But just to give you kind of a reality check about this, $5.2 billion spent in the 2008 election cycle by all federal candidates, including McCain and Obama. Exxon in that same period made $85 billion in profit. Pfizer made $27 billion selling just Lipitor alone. Last year, Goldman Sachs spent $16.5 billion on executive compensation. So if they choose to, corporations can completely overwhelm the political process. And they're going to choose to do it more and more. Not at that scale, but with more and more money. Most of it's not going to come directly from ads that are sponsored by Exxon. It's going to be run through trade associations, the Chamber of Commerce, and through front groups like Americans for Prosperity. This has already been in the works, but it's going to happen increasingly more so. And we're seeing now, particularly with the Chamber, the emergence of a third party. So the Chamber is in some senses an adjunct of the Republican Party, but they're also, even more importantly, a standalone third corporate party in Washington, D.C., and a dominant force in our politics. We're going to see industries that are very politically engaged, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, oil, energy, Wall Street, spend more money in a focused way with big impacts. We're going to see more spending at the state and local level because it's a constitutional decision. It wipes out what states and localities can do to protect themselves. And we're going to see, I think, very focused campaigns in a number of instances targeting individual holders of office or candidates for office who are taking on specific corporate interests, not sort of general corporate interests, but you're taking on this mining company, you're denying them a permit, you're telling this developer they can't build somewhere, you're just going to spend money in the next election and knock that person out. And exactly as Marge said, after that happens a couple times, that's a huge chilling message for everybody else in politics. And it's even going to determine who decides to enter politics, because what's the point if things are so bad that when you get there, you can't do what you want to do because you're going to be attacked like that. So it's not going to be a complete apocalypse. There's still going to be a lot of room to do many good things, but it's going to make things much harder in a situation that's already bad enough. So what do we do about it? As Marge said, there are a range, and as Representative Grayson will say more about, there are a range of mitigating things we can do. The Disclose Act is a super modest effort to do it. More consequential things would, for example, prohibit lobbyists and contractors from spending money in elections. Most importantly, we have to have public financing of elections. But even if we have public financing of elections, we're still going to have the problem left over from Citizens United that corporations can overwhelm the baseline of support that every candidate would receive through public financing. So the only way to solve the Citizens United problem is to overturn Citizens United. And that either is done by a new court deciding to undo this decision, or through a constitutional amendment. We can't control what happens, who resigns when and who gets appointed when, although People for is reminding us that we can have big influence. But we can initiate an effort for a constitutional amendment. And I hope that you all join the effort. So we've got our own little effort going on at Don't Get Rolled, but we're focused right now with People for the American Way on this pledge campaign and getting candidates for office to say, look, we're either for or against this idea of a constitutional amendment to overturn this decision. Is it going to be a hard thing to do? Yes, it's going to be a hard thing to do, but we've done it 27 times, we the American people, and we need to do it again. But I think it's also worth fighting this fight, not just because it's the right thing to do, which it is, but because even in the course of taking the case forward, we framed things as well as we possibly could for a progressive audience. This is a pure question of corporate power and corporate influence over our elections. There's more esoteric and interesting things about corporate personhood, but the basic question, do you think that Exxon and Goldman Sachs have the right to buy our elections? That's a winning question for us. If we make every candidate answer that question, we are framing elections exactly right. So whether we get all the way or when we get all the way to winning a constitutional amendment, along the way, I think we're going to do a lot of really good things. So I hope you all jump aboard this effort. We need help at Pledge for Democracy. We need to make the site better, and we need help about how to get the word out, and we want you all to join in the effort with us. This is something that it's going to be a hard thing to do, but I don't think the court gave us any choice. We have to win this fight. Thanks.